and welcome back to Reading in the Middle, where we talk with the authors and illustrators creating stories that make young readers laugh, wonder, think, and maybe even see themselves a little more clearly. Today, I'm so excited to welcome author Matthew Manning and illustrator Matthew Lux, the creative team behind the new book, The Spark Experiment. This graphic novel has everything middle grade readers love: a missing scientist, a mysterious micro-universe, real experiments, big laughs, a fearless friend named Marta, and a strange little creature named Spark, who just might steal every scene he's in. At the center of the story is David Patel, a kid who wants to start a science club, but finds himself pulled into an adventure much bigger than he ever imagined. And what's great about this book is that science is not just something the characters talk about. It's something they do. They test, fail, try again, make messes, and discover that curiosity can take you places you never expected. And guess what, listeners? You can do the science experiments too. Yes, you can. And you can do them right at home. So in this conversation, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how both Matts collaborated together on the Spark Experiment. Matthew Manning, Matthew Lux, welcome to Reading in the Middle. Matthew Lux and Matthew Manning, welcome to Reading in the Middle. How are you today?
Doing
Very
good.
good.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Matthew, this is your second time on the show. Welcome back.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to be back.
Oh, wonderful. Because this time around, the both of you have collaborated on the Spark Experiment. And I'm going to ask both of you, without revealing too much, what would you say to a young reader who asks you, why should I read the Spark Experiment tonight?
Well, I think the main draw of the book is that that it has do-it-yourself science experiments throughout. So it's a fantasy story, and then every chapter has 3 science experiments that kids can do at home with just materials found around the house. So I think that's really the main hook. So when I've noticed that when I talk about it at conventions or appearances, people are like, "Oh, it's a really cool looking book. It's a fantasy story?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but there's also a learning component to it," and that's when the parents perk up. But our delivery system for it is we don't want it to feel like you're learning. We don't want it to feel like that, oh, this is a textbook or something, stiff or boring. This is a really fun adventure that the main characters just happen to use science to get from one part to the next.
And kids love science experiments. I know when I was a kid, I used to check out science experiment books. Like there's one that always pops in my mind, and then we'll get back to the questions. But one that pops in my mind is you take a bottle like this, put it in the freezer, take it out, put a penny on top of it, and the penny flips.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, this is great. Now, I forget the reason why this happens, but it's kind of cool. So, yeah. I mean,
And that's one of the things too in the book is that we explain talk about the science, and then often the characters are explaining why it's happening, what principles, but in variable terms, like things that anybody can understand. Because Matt and I aren't science majors by any chance. We both went to art college, so it's kind of like this is science that we can wrap our heads around. And I tried all these with my kids, and we had a lot of fun. And then you kind of figure, oh, this is why this is happening too afterwards. A little bit of the explanation part too.
and this is for both of you, but the book begins by asking where ideas come from. Where did the original spark for the story come from?
I guess it started with me working with Dan Shaw, who runs the company High Touch High Tech here in Asheville, and we had met, and he was interested in making a comic, And I was like, oh, this is like explaining kind of like the process that there's a script first and then it goes to the artist and the artist designs all the characters and draws all the panels and everything and tells the story. And so once we kind of went back and forth about that, we figured out a format. Oh, well, let's put science experiments throughout. And then I brought in Matt because Matt and I went to college together, and we have similar senses of humor and storytelling approaches. And so I thought Matt would be a perfect match for the book.
Oh, I didn't know you both went to college together. That's pretty cool. And now you collaborate.
We both went to School of Visual Arts, so we're at exactly the same age but yeah, it was Matt asked me if I wanted to work on this project. We talk and we communicate, and some of our old friends, we do like group chats sometimes, so it's really cool that we all keep in touch actually. But it was a very like easy to slip into project. It started first as just one issue, and I'm like, that's perfect, I have time for that. And we've worked together on a few minor things in the past, but not for quite a while. So, and then also working with the company High Touch High Tech was a really good experience because they kind of understood, they knew what they knew, and they knew that we knew what they don't know when it comes about making the comic. So they let us do our thing. And that was really wonderful, actually. They helped us with the experiments to make sure that we correctly, I drew them correctly and that we had the right reference. So they have a lot of really excellent videos and reference. There's a link to those videos in the book too, which is, I think, is super cool. We got them in the book with the plots. So like a kid can be like reading, really have an exciting part, and then it goes to an experiment and they can go back and like try that experiment now. But we also have the videos that they can refer to. So it's very cool. And then working with that, like I'm a writer as well. I feel like we have kind of similar approach to humor. We kind of have a bit of a sarcastic and mix sarcasm and goofy, which is like my favorite. So it's been an absolute pleasure to work on it.
And the book came out in April of this year as well. So listeners, you can just go out and get that book right now. So I just want to let our listeners know that it's available. Now, my question for Matt M. David begins the story trying to unsuccessfully recruit members for his science club, but minutes later he discovers that his mother may be trapped in another dimension. Why did you want his ordinary disappointment to suddenly become an extraordinary adventure?
I think that's the fun part about this is that we grounded in the real world, and then automatically we're going somewhere weird and fancy, like fanciful, but like just a weird dimension where the laws of physics don't necessarily apply there as compared to here. And one of the reasons when I was a little kid, I was very imaginative and always kind of off in my own world. And so this might have just been kind of like a literal interpretation of that, like of let's go on an adventure immediately, start showing how science can be used for this, just for the adventure itself, to help propel the characters and help defeat the villains and that sort of thing. And so, and then, hopefully by the end, we see David's approach to science a little bit different, but also his the people around him welcoming him a little bit more into the community and realizing, oh, there is something to all this science stuff. So.
And what does David discover about himself once science becomes more than an interest and turns into a rescue mission?
I think what's interesting is that David goes from being like a science fan to someone who actually applies it. So I think by the end, he's considering himself more of a scientist rather than just like someone who just does fun little experiments, around. And then with his sidekick, Marta Martinez, who is probably everybody's favorite character that reads it.
Yes.
She's just this really enthusiastic person who also has like the same kind of love for science, like built into her character. And so we see her as well, like kind of stand up to to these villains characters. I say villain in quotes because there's some twists coming, here and there throughout the story. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of one of those, just an interesting that to watch these characters grow a little bit. Like we've actually been working on a sequel project, and there's even more developments as these characters start to come out of their shells a little bit more, as they start to age and start to have other interests. And so they've just been a lot of fun to play with.
Why do you think readers are going to fall in love with Marta?
Well, I just think she's so much fun. Like there's Marta is loosely based, her personality is loosely based on my youngest, Gwen. And around that time, Gwen was really like has kind of like the class clown thing that I grew up. I was voted class clown in my high school. Gwen seems to be following in that, unfortunately for all her teachers. But actually, she's very well behaved at school, I've heard. So, and that Marta is too. Marta is very well behaved around adults, but she just can't control her enthusiasm. So some of the quotes are actually from my daughter herself. As the story progresses. And so
yeah, as your friend, though, Matt, I also kind of feel like there's definitely a fair amount of yourself in Marta. I didn't know you as a little kid, but I've known you since college, since we were teenagers. So there's definitely an energeticness that is very unique to you. And I feel like that is a part of the mix. I mean, as a writer myself, like I always throw different aspects of myself, sometimes amplify it, sometimes tone down in characters that I write. But I definitely see you in Marta.
Well, Matthew L., what is the most Martha moment in the book that you can tease without spoiling it?
So Marta is like they both work as like a good team. It's definitely a very good team because they're both very enthusiastic in their own ways. My favorite kind of teams are not just there's a straight man and the silly person. There's a bit of that, but like each has their moment of like when they're really intense about something and the other notices it. We're like, oh, he went a bit, he's a little focused on that. And that's kind of like my favorite dynamic is never just like, like Martin and Lewis, where it's only one goofy guy and one, I like it kind of more Coen Brothers-esque. So I would say like let me think. There's a moment at the end, it's not really a spoiler, but like where she kind of just takes charge of like a group of little alien creatures. Like the general like gist of like the like of the plot of the story is they discover through David's mother like creates this scientific like magnifying glass that can bring them to another dimension, like a micro universe kind of dimension. In there, they meet a creature called the Spark. The Spark is kind of like represents inspiration, gives them inspiration, is the blue guy behind me here. So it's like a nice idea of science is not like a stiff subject. It really does take inspiration. And as an artist, it's like a very comparable sort of thing. But then there are the possibility of like a negative version of that. And we call them the negatrons, where it takes away inspiration, makes you lazy, makes you tired, makes you just don't want to do anything. And at one point, a bunch of them kind of wreak havoc and get loose in the real world. So it's all about kind of like juggling, like, well, what do we do with these two creatures, these two sides of ourselves? So a lot of the plot kind of revolves around that general idea. But there's a part where she kind of leads them into like the school. There's a lot of just really fun. I'm trying to think of like specific. For me, it's like what I like to draw, and I like her expressions because she can say some pretty funny things, some pretty, goofy ideas or just reactions, and because she's very like reactive. So that's probably my favorite as an artist, is just her drawing her many expressions.
Awesome.
I think that's one of the ways that she gets to be fun too, is when we do the science experiments. Unfortunately for Matt, there's a lot of panels on those pages because we're trying to keep them all on one to two pages at most for the science experiment. So we have plenty of room for the story. So, but there's a lot of times where it's like David just even reading instructions on how to do an experiment, and Marta, pops in with a joke here and there. She just constantly, like Matt was saying, she reacts to everything. And so like her attention span is like, lightning fast. She has to move on to the next thing. And she's super interested in every little thing that's happening. And so I think that's been just the real joy of her being in the comic.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That's great. Both of you, those are great answers. And Matthew L., when you mentioned David and Marta, when they
first meet Spark, David, he approaches Spark like a scientific discovery, while Marta immediately wants to go out there and hug him and become his best friend, because that's how she is. But what does that scene reveal about the two children, and why is Spark impossible to resist? Because I'm looking at it back there and I want to just.
I think the idea that it's really cute, can appeal in different ways. So I think that David also would agree that that Spark is a cute character, but he's a more analytical kind of person. So that's kind of how he articulates it. He probably is a little bit less emotional, or the way he deals with his emotions, in my view, is through like science and analytics. Whereas Marta is it's all on her sleeve. She also loves science and interested in that. It's like two different kind of takes on that sort of subject, I guess. As an illustrator, it was very fun designing all the characters. The way I designed Spark, it was sort of based, I think, on an earlier design. I'm kind of forgetting now, but I made it my own I actually, it's a very simple design. It's so simple that kids can draw it. And I'm actually, in retrospect, really glad I did that. We even have like a how to draw Spark section in the back of the book, but it's like a circle with some crazy hair. But with that simplicity, is relatability, also cuteness, and also just there's more to it than meets the eye when you do simple designs, because like you have to be very precise, but you can really do pretty universal things, if that makes sense, from a design point of view.
But Spark does not speak in ordinary words. How did you use his expressions, movement, and unusual speech in the balloons to make readers understand exactly what Spark is feeling?
So in the scripts, Matt wrote whenever the Spark creatures spoke, as well as the Negatrons, and then of course my favorite, the anti-Spark character, who's kind of the villain, as inaudible alien gibberish. Was that it? Something like that.
Yeah, something wrong.
Like he didn't write any like dialogue. He just wrote like alien said inaudible alien gibberish. So I'm like, great. Now thanks, Matt. I have to create a language now. And I was just like, that never looks good if I make some fake letters or whatever. And I didn't really feel like I had I'm sure some smarter person can do that and make a really awesome looking language, but I am not it's not my specialty. So I kind of like the idea. I'm like, well, what if it's visual, and what if it's kind of more like they speak a pattern? And the more I did it, the more, at first I just kind of plugged it in there just for a cool visual. But as I went on, I started to make the shapes of the lions and the colors start to kind of match the energy of the scene, or what they are supposed to be saying. I'm going to be a lot more deliberate about that in the future also, where I just kind of wanted it to, I want to play around with how can I make a color and shapes and lines feel like something that they're actually, an emotion they're actually trying to project.
What experiment would you think readers will stop and gather supplies and say, we have to try this right now?
Well, I think there's a lot of really good ones in here. I know a lot of kids like the volcano type, explosion ones. For me, the most fun I had was where you make a compass out of a cork and a needle and magnets. And that was just fascinating to watch this. Like my kids and I did it, and to watch the needle turn on it. It's like, I don't understand this magnetic pole. It's like magic. You're like looking at a real life magic trick, and so things like that are a lot. It's fun too, because I had a parent come over to me they saw me at a couple shows in a row, and they came up to me after a convention appearance and said, our kids really like this book, but they both like different parts. So they had one kid that just wanted to read the fantasy story, did not care about the science, and the other one was just jumping from one science experiment to the next, gathering all the materials instantly. So I think I think that was and that's just the same household, one pair of siblings. So I think that's the neat appeal of the book, is that you can capture both type of kid. And if you're one type of kid, I can't imagine. I was more of the creative, type when I was a kid. I can't imagine not doing these experiments as if I was the age going through this book. I think they're presented in a really fun way, and Matt makes them so accessible. And then also there's a video if you can't figure it out from there. So there's just a lot of ways to approach it.
Yeah, I think one of my favorites, I kind of like the ones that are building something. Like there's a couple, and my favorite chapter is chapter 5, where they kind of like go back to this micro universe where I had a really lot of fun designing like the imagery. But there's one point where they actually make like a catapult out of like popsicle stick type things, and it's just designed really well, and it's as simple as being able to build something, but then you can actually like launch marshmallows and pop balls and stuff. And there's another one where we build a bridge, like a stable bridge with just like, again, like toothpicks and like candy dots. And I think I would, as a kid, I think those are the ones I would have gravitated towards because they were building something.
Now, which experiment created the biggest mess?
Well, I did the volcano one at High Touch High Tech. So that one probably would have made the biggest mess. That's from the first chapter. There's like a big explosion one. And we did that outside. I was not expecting it. They're like set it all up for me because they're, like I said, they're only based like 20 minutes down the street from me. And so I went over there and they went in the park. They didn't really, prep me for what was going to happen when I poured the chemicals together. But yeah, that would have made the biggest one. I recommend people doing that one outside. But because most of them aren't too bad otherwise. There's some other, like, there are several that could get, like we did Space Mud recently on a different podcast where I was actually doing the experiment live. And I'm glad I wore gloves because it was getting everywhere. It was food coloring and all this. But that's one of the best parts about the book is that you're really not going out and buying a lot of supplies. You're not buying all this stuff. There's very little prep, and there's very little there isn't that much cleanup aside from a couple of those. So I think it's much more accessible. I remember getting a lot of books to the library. They were like how to build like this giant castle. And then we had to go to a craft store and spend like tons of money. And my mom's like, all right, this is what we're doing this week. And I'd get halfway done and bored, at a time. So it's nice to be able to approach most of this stuff just from what's in your kitchen. And if not, go out and get like borax or something, and that's the only there'll be like maybe one or two things, or a bag of birdseed or something, depending on the experiment.
Yeah, and vinegar and baking soda.
Yeah.
That was always the one I used to have because we had that in the house. And then have the little canister for the film canisters. And I would use that to, make a mess. But yeah. And my question for Matthew L., the micro universe, it has to feel strange and dangerous and exciting and visually different from David's ordinary world. How did you design a place that readers would immediately want to explore, even though they know something dangerous may be waiting there?
That's a good question. So I was definitely following direction from Matt. He had general ideas of like some color schemes, because I think that was an important idea to have. Like we had the sky was kind of like a magenta pink. I think you wrote it as pink, and the grass was often like bright yellow. And just like kind of me doing my version of like some of these. I think in the script there was suggestions of things randomly floating in the sky and stuff like that. So I love that idea and I love those sorts of visuals. So I kind of went with that. But in general, Matt was pretty open to kind of my interpretation of his ideas. There are, for plot reasons, there are times where he's a little bit more specific about how a layout has to be. At one point, they get to a area that's supposed to be like acid. It's like an acid river, so obviously they can't go by that. But I don't think he said what color it was, so I would just play around with what I think looks otherworldly, that doesn't look too unpleasant but also scary. Because you're right, it's kind of a fun balance. But I think because of my art style, it'll always look kind of fun and scary in the context of these extremely cartoony looking goofy characters. It's stylized, but the backgrounds I definitely put a bit more into, because it's my favorite part of being a cartoonist is actually designing the backgrounds, drawing the actual backgrounds, which I've heard is rare, but I love it. So, and I particularly love more natural settings. So I definitely leaned into that in this micro universe with very wacky, or not wacky, but this odd looking trees. I tried to just really push like what I think a very strange otherworldly tree could look like, or different kind of plants and foliage or rock formations. I loved the idea of the floating rocks. So at one point we have like a floating, like smaller rocks to kind of like make us a floating stairwell to another like cliff area. I really enjoyed
Yeah.
designing that. Matt wrote in chapter 5 about this floating island has an open center with a lake. So, but there's like it has its own gravity. So at one point they kind of like splash into the lake where they go through the whole island to the other side, and then the gravity pulls them back onto like land, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a
Mhm.
bit tricky too. I had to run it. I had to have him run it by me again, just make sure I knew what he was going for. But it turned out really good, I think, and it turned out really visually interesting and also exciting because it's a really cool idea.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's actually one that Matt was like, "Wait, what do you mean by this?" And then so I think I had a drawing somewhere here in my office where I like drew up what I was, you know, real crude version of what it, you know, and he was like, "Oh, it's a donut." And it was like,
Yeah, I'm a more visual learner. I always have been. So like just reading his description, kind of, I'm like, I don't know if I'm getting this. I got to double check.
dude, I remember even writing that, being like, "This is a little bit like, you know, might be a little confusing about how the gravity works in this situation," kind of thing. So that's not the first time I've had to like draw something real quick. Like I remember working with a different artist, and they were like, I had described a panel a certain way, and they're like, "Oh, there's no way I can draw it from this angle. You can't fit." And then so I just sent them a picture of of how like a thumbnail of, it, and they're like, "All right." I think that was their way of saying I'd rather frame it another way, which they could have done, but you know, when they said, "Oh, we can't do it," I was like, "Wait, yes, you can." Because
That can be a lot of fun interpreting that because like you do, you know, sometimes you'll put a lot of information into a page that it's like, well, I have to, you know, for clarity, sometimes I have to reinterpret things, not often, but occasionally, or to make
Mhm.
there's enough space for the dialogue and that sort of thing. And if it's particularly difficult, I will obviously just give Matt a text or something, you know.
yeah, that's one of the nice backgrounds about, even though I'm a writer, that I went to art school, just because I had to learn how to do visual storytelling with everybody else. You know, I grew up very much reading comics and comic strips, so that was a language I already understood. But like the ins and outs of storytelling and everything, I was a cartooning major, so studying that for 4 years intensively, realizing, oh, this is the information I need to give to the artist.
Yeah.
And then like with Matt, for instance, with the fantasy world, I was kind of like, well, I want to. It's always fun to like when you know what your artist is excited about or interested in. So for Matt, I was kind of like, well, Matt really likes classic video games, so let's make like this world like something that could be in Zelda or something that you could explore and have a lot of fun. And you know, because if you're the more excited your artist gets, the more that energy translates to the page. And I think that really worked for this in particular, just because like you could just see Matt's signature all over the micro universe. It's very cool.
But another really fun aspect of working with a writer is they'll push you into directions that you may not have thought of yourself. So like, for example, what we're working on right now, Matt has a place that's like he described it as like 80s Trapper Keeper universe.
Ooh.
That was just for one. I'm just like, oh, I remember the ones I had, and I did
Mhm.
a little online research, and it was. I don't think I would have come up with that on my own. It was super, super fun. I kind of did my spin on that and add lots of chrome and like floating things and like I even want to. If we go, I think we'll go back to there. But if we do, I kind of like want mysteriously like a airbrush tiger in the sky or something.
Awesome. Well, here's
I
the
would love
by
that.
the way.
Oh yeah.
That's
Oh
the
yeah.
that's the weird donut world where, or you know, the donut land formation where they fall through and then come up the other side and have to walk around from the bottom. So it was
Oh my gosh, that's
next.
great.
I have to get I still have that drawing somewhere that I did. Where it looks fairly similar, but you know, is my crude. You know, I don't haven't really drawn since we graduated college, so it's been a long time.
Now, is there, to follow up that question I just asked, is there a creature or landscape or visual detail that readers should pause and examine really closely besides the donut?
For
Well,
like Easter eggs or anything, or
Maybe.
there is
yeah,
stuff that
I don't think we hit anything, but like we definitely I did hide two things in the book. I don't know if I ever told you, Matt, but
Oh.
at the end, so at the same time I was doing this book, I just happened to be finishing another book, the one that we did the previous podcast about. And there's a scene where the whole school is, or not the whole school, but a bunch of his classmates are seeing towards the end, like where David is doing another science presentation. And I hid my characters in the audience from the other book. It's somewhere in there. So if you want to look.
Okay, listeners, you hear that? Somewhere in there. Now, without revealing too much, this is for both of you. What makes the Negatrons such unusual and unsettling opponents?
I think what's really fun about them is just like how Matt's handled drawing them, just because they are lazy inducing creatures. So, I always describe them as lethargic, and, they zap your energy kind of thing. And so a lot of times the description, because now I wouldn't do this with every artist I work with, but since I know Matt so well, a lot of times I'll just be like, Matt, draw a whole bunch of Negatrons doing funny stuff. I can trust that they're going to be, doing silly things here and there. And Matt just added like so much fun to the book, where on a splash page where it's a little ominous. For instance, there's one scene where they're like kind of falling into like where a whole bunch of Negatrons are. And that could have, the purpose of in the story is to be a little ominous, a little like, oh no, what's going to happen next type of thing. Meant as a chapter ending cliffhanger. But also then when Matt draws it, there's also this other level of humor in it too, where these characters are just doing silly, dumb stuff like all around. Like, they'll just be like, just relaxing the weirdest ways, or just doing things that, little jokes that I wouldn't have thought of. And so just having that extra element to it, it's more than like you have the story purpose, and then there's also these little extra things. If you look at the art more, you're going to have more fun, as the story.
I love being able to, I'm glad you're okay with it too, because I love being able to add, obviously, like only if it's appropriate for the story and nothing too attention grabbing. But that was a lot of fun. I have one where like, it's like what Matt is describing. It's kind of like it's a pretty, charged scene where they're like coming out of the sky and about to take over the regular world. And the characters, David and Marta, didn't expect that, and don't know what to do. I think at one point in the far background, one of them has a parachute or something randomly. And then like they meet, a bunch of them are just running around and like chasing students, but I definitely have, I think some just like just decide to go to sleep, or like on another scene, one's like laying on top of one of the clocks on the wall of the school, just like really awkwardly, his back. One's in another scene is just like, I think like licking a pine cone or something, or just like smelling, just like looking. It's the sort of thing, like it's my favorite kind of humor is lazy people humor, because I was definitely a very lazy child and I can relate. So I just find that kind of stuff hilarious. Just things that are kind of unexpected.
Why was it important to show young readers that fear and frustration and sadness are real feelings and not failures? Because that does happen.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, with this story in particular, there's a lot of saying you're not one way or the other. Just because you're having a bad day doesn't mean you're a bad person. And there's things that I've learned, just as being a dad to two kids, just because a lot of the conversation is like, you're having, especially when they were littler, you're having very strong emotions now, but feelings change. Your emotions are going to be different just in a few minutes. Just give it some time and feel what you're feeling, and the next one's coming. And I think that's a lot of the theme about this is I also, in a lot of my stories, a lot of my comics and other books and things, I don't really like the idea of like good versus evil necessarily. I don't know. I've never met an evil person. I've met some people that have had some tragic situations that have resulted in awful thing and turning them against, the world or things like that. But I don't know if you're necessarily, I don't know if I necessarily believe in the concept of evil. So in this, we examine that too, about how are the bad guys really bad? Are the good guys really good? And or is, does everybody have, a little bit like two Martas, one howling inside you, that kind of thing.
I will say that, the book, you know how they always say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but when you look at that cover, I'm like, I want to know what's happening. I'm excited. I want to jump right into this world and what's going on. So I just, it's from my perspective, growing up, that would have been the first book. And then finding out that it's interactive. I mean, you can go to YouTube and look at the videos, and you can actually do the experiments. And mentioning Matthew M., you mentioned that you don't need a whole bunch of supplies. So like your mom took you to the craft store to buy all those supplies, and then you just like got bored after a while. I mean, you can find things at home, and it's easier, and it doesn't take a lot of time. And I like it that you mentioned that your mom took you to the library to get your science books. I forgot to mention that piece in there. So bravo, Mom.
Yeah, that was it was the 80s, so my babysitter was often in the library. My brother and I would just be in the library because I guess Mom knew some of the people, some of the librarians and things, and so we would just be there for hours at a time. I don't
Right
know.
on.
It worked out, so.
So you did mention, both mentioned that there's might be something coming out soon, maybe a sequel to the Spark experiment, maybe, or something totally different. You have
We're
anything coming out next?
we're hoping,
Collaboration?
we do have, something in the works. We're really hoping for more Spark. We're gonna actually find out very soon. There's even some possibilities of some other fun, kind of media things coming with Spark, hopefully. Everything's still in flux, so we can't, you know, tell about everything yet, but we do have, there are some things like these. Our Spark plushes are actually out, which is the first plush. I've written over 100 books and equally as many comics, and I've never had merchandise made from one of my things, so it's really fun. There's actually
Yes.
going to be, you have this big guy, and there's also a little keychain guy, which I actually like even better, which is, they have them at High Touch High Tech now, the prototypes for, and he's so fun.
I'm
There's gonna be
eagerly awaiting mine.
yeah.
How can we get a Spark?
Uh,
Is it available now?
Yeah, they just went live with it, I think last week or maybe the week before. There's, if you go to the sparkuniverse.com, which is the High Touch, their page just about this book in the series, you can go and they set up a little store where you can get the Spark, or you could get the book and Spark as a combo and that sort of thing. And then there's actually t-shirts and things that you can get. Like they do I think like print on demand type t-shirts type thing, which Matt and I definitely need to get for our next convention appearance. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, lots of fun stuff like that, especially if you're really, if you're really into it, if kids really get excited about it, it's kind of fun to see, like it's pretty close to life size for Spark back here, like kind of how he is in
Mm-hmm.
the show. So you can have your own little inspiration guy, like, helping you with, as you do your homework, he can sit right next to you.
Yes, inspiring, right? Very much so. I like that. And I will add the website to the show notes for our on the podcast. So, listeners, you'll be able to go to the website and get your T-shirt or your own very own Spark and the book
Yeah.
and the combo. You mentioned that combo, so I like that. So, Matthew, I don't know if you know about our lightning round, but here on Reading in the Middle, I like to do a little lightning round with my guests. So this is going to be called the Spark Lightning Round. And I'm going to ask both of you a question. And again, if you've listened to this podcast before, any of the episodes, you don't have to be really lightning fast or speed. I just like to kind of pump it up a little bit, like it's going to be like this lightning round, but it doesn't have to be. It does not have to be.
This actually reminds me, Matt and I used to, when we were freshmen in college, we played this particular board game about movies, and it always had, there was a lightning round in it, and everyone at the table would sing like lightning round, like whenever it came up. It's funny to do another one.
You're giving me some ideas. I need to have something like that. Like press a button, it goes lightning round. I like that. Thank you. I'm taking that idea. So, are you both ready?
Yeah.
Ready?
Okay, and either one can answer. So this is for both of you. I'll just start with Matthew L. Favorite experiment?
Favorite experiments. I mean, I talked about the catapult one again because it was a fun one to build. Maybe the one where the it's the goo that if you press it slowly, you just sink into it. But if you slap it hard, it's like firm. You remember that one?
Oh.
That one, that was not a thing when I was a kid, but I think people know about that one now. And I love it. It's really cool.
Anything slime, goo is always fun. Matthew M., your favorite experiment?
Mine's back to that cork compass one. That was
Okay, that's your favorite? Okay.
I was fascinated.
Favorite Marta line?
Oh boy. Yeah, this is the slowest lightning round ever. She had a like, for some reason, I'm just thinking of like just one of her little during an experiment when they're talking about a color and they're like, what color? And instead of just saying like blue, she's like blue, I choose you, which is kind of a Pokemon reference. Like for my oldest was into Pokemon for a bit. So
Isn't there in the first chapter there's one where she like says like shush your face or like shut your face to like David? David's like, oh, that was kind of rude as an afterthought. Anybody?
A gummy candy or exploding volcano?
gummy candy for me, easier cleanup.
I'd like to try because I never did that one. I'd love to. As a kid, the volcano is the only one I probably did. But yeah, if I knew you could make your own gummy candy, yeah, I'll go with that too.
Character you would want beside you in the micro universe?
I would say probably David because he knows what he's doing a little bit more. I feel like Marta would put us in jeopardy way too many times just for the sheer fun of it.
I would go with the anti-Spark because he's my favorite character in that whole book. He's the villain, but as you read, you learn more about all of these characters, which I think is an awesome angle that Matt went down. But if you're going to be in this world, why wouldn't you want the villain to be on your side, right? Like, because they know
Right.
the ins and outs. Yeah, I really just like drawing him like a giant with these really, really impressive boots. And like, I'm really hoping we're going to see more of him in the future. This is just a pipe dream, but I would love a plush of the anti-Spark. We'll see. Maybe.
We'll see.
Like basketball sized,
Mhm. And the last question, what sparks your creativity?
I'm just kind of like, really be anything. Like that's like, I'll see, like I was out walking the dog and like the other day and felt like this, like, wouldn't that be weird if there were, and if there was like something behind me, like a weird sculpture thing, and that led to this whole other plot for something. So it's like all the time, like I like often, just the littlest things during the day, I just gets my brain going. Or another things too is reading a lot. I'm what they call a Wednesday warrior, where I go to the comic shop every Wednesday. I ran out right before this podcast to go to the comic store and get my my weekly books,
Nice.
that sort of thing. So, and I've noticed that, especially if it's a comic that I'm not as enjoying as much, my mind starts wandering and I start thinking, oh, what if this plot was, what if this was a continuation of this plot or something like that. So it's really all the time in everything.
I think for myself, it comes from a lot of places. I love history. I love watching YouTube videos on history and different topics. Whatever you're kind of into, and I feel like you can kind of go into that direction, not like super directly, but like I think like right now, probably the thing I watch the most are like either like YouTube home renovation things or maker spaces and maker things, such as like a lot of different types, things like woodworking, which is something I actually do now that I have a space for a workshop. And also like I watch people make like dioramas or paint, miniatures, or make cosplay armor, which I don't do cosplay, but I'd love to try to make that stuff out of like foam and different things to kind of like sculpt it. It looks super fun. So like that always kind of makes me like think of interesting or gardening types of stuff. Like sometimes I think about like when I'm thinking of coming up with different ideas, or I feel like kind of challenging my thought process on coming up with something new. I'll do the thing where I'm like, okay, this is a genre that I've not done before, or this is a genre I don't tend to like that much, but what would I do to make it myself like it? Or what would I do to do my version of a sci-fi, dystopia, or my version of a robot story, or a romance or something like that. Sometimes I'm like, I've never done this kind of story. What would I do? I don't do it because I don't like it, but what would I do to make myself like it? And then I just kind of take a lot of these things. Also, other artists, other artists' techniques can be really inspiring, even if I'm obviously not ripping it off, but get inspired by, like, Miyazaki, the director Miyazaki for Studio Ghibli. He does a lot of his prep for his movies by doing these image board kind of things where he does these loose but beautiful watercolors over like sketchy pencil. So I did that for a book I did, the Prunella and the Cursed Skull Ring book. And that was kind of like the technique I kind of wanted to kind of inspire, just the way I went about the design aspect of that particular book. And that's also how I write, is visually. I do a lot of building up of designs, environment designs, character designs. If I have the time, I do as much of that as I can before I start a project. And I did a little bit of that with this, but I also kind of do that as I go. And it all depends on what amount of time you're able to kind of devote. So yeah, it comes from a lot of places. Also, honestly, it comes from family and friends. Spending time with my friends is just extremely, it's very necessary when you have such a job where you're very much like in your room for days on end working on a project and like either writing or drawing. You get to a point where you're like, I desperately need another person to talk to or to see. and then, it sounds very simple, but talking to somebody who's from a different background than you, who looks different than you, who is a different, job. It's so good to talk to somebody who, does not draw, or I'm also a teacher. And that's another thing that was a big inspiration for the other book I did about Japan. I have two characters in it that are extremely energetic and very goofy. And that's 100% based on my students. And I teach like 5 to 10-year-olds art classes, and they are just so much fun, so goofy, so silly. And I'm like, all books, all kids comics should be like this. So that's part of it. So a lot of things.
Yeah, I figured as much. I know that couldn't be a lightning round, but you guys are both creative, and I just want to know what gives you that spark that gives you that inspiration to put out such wonderful work, because it is. And I want to thank both of you for giving readers an adventure that they can not only read but actually participate in, because it's amazing. And Spark Experiment, listeners, it brings together a mysterious universe and unforgettable characters and laugh out loud moments and real science and friendship that proves that best discoveries rarely happen alone. So thank you both, Matthew Lux and Matthew Manning, for being on Reading in the Middle. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
I love the book. It was so amazing. And I just wanted to get so much out of it. And I didn't want to leave one person out. And I wanted to get both of your perspectives. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Matt and Matt, thank you so much for joining me on Reading in the Middle. The Spark Experiment is funny, fast-moving, and full of suspense and humor. It gives readers an adventure they can enjoy on the page and experiments they can actually try in real life. I love that this book reminds young readers that science does not have to start with knowing the answer. Sometimes it starts with a question, a mistake, a brave friend, or one very unexpected spark. Readers, if you love graphic novels, adventure, friendship, science, or stories that make you want to try something new, make sure you pick up The Spark Experiment. And educators, librarians, and parents, I know that this book will get your young readers really, 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 really interested in those experiments. And Matt, before we go, please confirm that no one has opened an interdimensional portal in the studio. I'm going to go and check. But before I go, please like, share, and subscribe. And share this with any young scientists that you know that may want to try the experiment or just want to read the graphic novel. Until then, I'm going to go check the studio for interdimensional portal. Thanks, everybody.